Okay, I think we can start. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Open Transparent Publishing and Research Integrity. I'm Melissa, Marketing Executive at F1000, and I'll be here to provide any technical support in today's session. Before we start, I will cover some webinar housekeeping. First of all participants will be muted throughout the webinar, but please do write your questions in the questions box, which can be found on your GoToWebinar control panel, which looks like the image on this slide. Our presenters will be answering as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. However, if your question isn't answered today, we'll be in touch with you shortly after. Also, if you need to drop off the webinar for any reason, the session is being recorded and will be sent to you a couple of days after the webinar. Full house today, as we have 4 speakers, Matthew Ranscombe and Leah Soler-Clavel from the F1000 editorial team, and Trina Soluta and Thomas Glassman from the F1000 peer review team. They will walk you through different practices, including open research practices that can help support research integrity. I will now pass over to Matthew Ranscombe, and I hope everyone enjoys this webinar.
All right, so for those of you who aren't aware of our model, at F1000Research, we offer rapid open publication of articles and other research outputs across the physical and life sciences, engineering, medicine, social sciences, and humanities. From the point of submission to publication online, our teams manage each stage and support authors through the process. As it is built to encourage open research through the open sharing of your study's underlying data, integrity is at the heart of our publication model. It is important to uphold research integrity, as this ensures that readers can have confidence in your research results. This is then reflected in the dissemination of and engagement with your research following publication. Research integrity can be defined as conducting research in ways which encourage trust in your research findings and which promote good practice throughout the research process. This covers the entire life cycle of a study, from the initial design of the study and conduct of research through to dissemination via publication as an article. Working with integrity involves aligning research activities with ethical principles and responsible research practice. Studies with integrity work to enhance research rather than hinder it through their contribution to good practice within the field. They also improve the overall quality of research, increasing impact through the greater likelihood that good research will be shared and disseminated. So now we've quickly defined research integrity, we're going to have a short poll to get you thinking about how much you consider integrity in your own work. Our first poll question today is research integrity a key consideration in your work? Melissa, can I ask you to start the poll?
Sure, Matthew, I confirm I have just launched the poll, and I'm just going to leave it open so that our participants can vote. Yeah, a couple of more seconds. Okay, Matthew, I'm closing the poll now. So 75% of the participants say it's a primary consideration, 23% have voted most of the time, and then there is a 2% that says sometimes.
Okay, brilliant. So it's really great to hear that most of you consider it a primary consideration. Now that we've defined research integrity, I just thought I'd go through some examples of research misconduct and how this impacts the integrity of research. These are just some of the situations in which authors have not upheld research integrity, which our publication process aids authors in avoiding, including plagiarism, failing to seek or obtain ethical approval, and poor reporting of research methods. For example, a plagiarized article may not make enough of an independent, original contribution to the existing body of research. Also, it's hard to have confidence in the methods and results of a study which does not have ethical approval. And poor reporting will likely mean that the reach and influence of an article is limited. In this webinar, we will explain how our open, transparent model helps to strengthen the integrity of your study. So here are the stages of the F1000 publication model, from submission and open data sharing to publication and peer review, and potential revisions to a study in response to this. We believe that open publishing serves to increase both the trust and confidence which readers have in research. So our process encourages integrity, that strengthens the integrity of your study through the checks and support which we provide throughout our process, encouraging replication and allowing for future studies to build upon your contribution to the body of research. I'll pass over to Leah now, who will go through originality of content.
Thanks, Matthew. So one of the first things that we check for when assessing a new submission is whether the content is original, as Matthew said, so that it hasn't been plagiarized in full or in part. So how do we go about this? First of all, we have a set of originality policies to prevent plagiarism or overlap in submissions. So first of all, an article should not have been published elsewhere before in another journal, as it would constitute a duplicate submission, which is unacceptable. The article shouldn't have been submitted to another journal and F1000Research at the same time either, because we're a publication in its own right. Any content that's not the author's own work must be correctly attributed with in-text citations. Text shouldn't really be reproduced verbatim unless it's in quotation marks, and even then it should be done without excess. And figures should only be reproduced if the correct permissions have been sought out and obtained from the copyright holder, and this also must be made very clear in the figure caption with correct citations. So how do we go about this? How do we check for originality? We use Crossref's similarity checker, which is called Authenticate. We check that the article is written in the author's own words, and if the overlap is too extensive, the article will likely be rejected. But if most of the content is original with only minor overlaps, we'll ask the author to reword it before we can continue. And in any case, we follow ethical publishing guidelines and guidance such as the ones developed by COPE. So there are different types of overlap that we look out for. This is not exhaustive, but the ones we tend to look out for the most are self-text recycling, salami slicing, and redundancy. Self-text recycling is basically when an author plagiarizes their own past articles. So the text must be reworded and correctly referenced, and any quotes in quotation marks. Salami slicing refers to cutting a piece of research into several papers when it should only be reported into a single paper, because it can skew the literature and can be misleading. And essentially, if it has the same sample populations, the same methods, and the same hypotheses, it should be reported in a single article. Redundancy refers to when parts of previous papers are being reintroduced. So, for example, if you are reusing the same methods or reusing the same data set, you shouldn't really be going into the same amount of details previously, but the original text should be referred to and not repeated with in-text citations. So the next thing we check for at pre-publication is that the data is available and open, which is very core to our model. And why have an open data policy? Making data available allows to test that the data is reproducible, which shows that the results are consistent, reliable, and did not happen by chance. Being able to replicate a study shows that the study and the methods are robust, that the protocol works essentially, but also the opposite. So it can highlight faults and allow to rework or invalidate studies that aren't reliable before this information can spread. And data availability is essential for research transparency to prevent fabricated or falsified data. but also reduces research waste and it could be reused by someone with a different perspective, a different skill set, different resources, which could lead to more opportunities for discoveries from this data set that wasn't envisioned before, without the need to generate similar data again, which could be costly and take time. So now we're going to get into another poll. So how important do you think ethical data sharing is to research integrity? Melissa, can we launch the poll?
Of course. As previously, I'm just going to leave it open for a couple of seconds. Okay, closing the poll now, Leah, for you. Okay, and 85% have voted very important, 13% moderately important, and there is a 2% that has voted not at all important.
Okay, cool, thank you. That's very insightful. So we endorse the FAIR data principles which underpin our open data policies. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So briefly, findable means that the data should be in a repository and have a permanent identifier, which most often is a DOI. Accessible means that it can be reached using a URL that starts with HTTPS or FTP, and there should always be a landing page for the metadata, even if the data itself ends up being removed. Interoperable means that the data should be machine readable, so in an open format, and use vocabularies that are common to the relevant research community. And reusable means that it should be under Creative Commons open license, so anyone can be reusing it from the from a legal perspective, but also that the metadata should contain enough information for anyone to reuse it, understanding why it was created and how to use it, essentially. So in light of this, we have developed our own open data policies, which state that, first of all, data underlying the results absolutely must be provided. Data can't be accessible upon request unless one of the exemptions stated in our policies applies. Data from research involving humans, whether it's survey data or medical research, must be correctly de-identified following the safe harbor method. And the only exemptions that we will consider and recognize are the ones listed on the slide here, and they're also in our policies. And it includes essentially if there are any ethical issues, for example, if the data can't be de-identified, or there are privacy concerns, or if the data is owned by a third party and you don't have the right to publish it again. But in any case, we follow the guiding principle that data should be as open as possible and as closed as necessary. And to adhere to these policies, F1000Research has developed a set of open data guidelines for authors to make their data available, which we check have been followed at pre-publications. And it's also important for these guidelines to be followed so that peer reviewers can assess the data, access the data, and assess it at peer review stage. So how do we go about checking the data is open at pre-publication? We look for a data availability statement. So all manuscripts must have a DAS at the end. We check that authors have included a DOI to access the data or another permanent identifier, and that the data is under an open license. So CC0 or CC by 4 are the ones we recommend. We also check that the files in the project are in an open format. And the data statement at the end of the manuscript must include underlying data, so raw or source data, so whether the data has been reused from a source or are generated by the authors. And any supplementary materials must be in a repository as well and cited as extended data, as well as any completed report date guidelines, checklists like PRISMA or CARE if they are applicable. And essentially submissions without a data DOI and or a data availability statement that is in breach of our policies will be withdrawing the article and asking authors to resubmit it. For restricted data, if it must be kept restricted under one of the recognized exemptions, the data availability statement, well, first of all, there must be a data availability statement, and it must contain the reasons why the data is restricted, all information for readers or reviewers to apply for access, and the conditions under which the access will be granted. And the exact requirements can vary depending on the exemption, but these are the essential elements that we will ask for. So I've included a couple examples of data availability statement. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but essentially you can see the arrow points towards the DOI and the citation numbers. So the DOI must also be cited in the references. There are descriptions of the files contained so that it can be reused, so that that refers to the context we were mentioning earlier. And here you can see the CC0 license applied, and that must be specified in the statement as well. There you go. This is an example of restricted data statement. So you have the instructions and the conditions of access to data, and also any limitations. So here, for example, the transcripts not being in English. The extended data is open, however, and you have a DOI and a citation number, and you also have the reporting guidelines and the open license. And I've also included a slide regarding the benefits of open data, because there are also individual benefits to it. So please feel free to consult this blog that will explain, well, 5 selfish reasons to work reproducibly and share your data. We also check that software and code adhere to our open data policies. So we endorse the FAIR principles for software and code for transparency and replicability purposes, because software and code used essentially can affect the results and can make it difficult to replicate a study if you don't have access to them. So prepublication checks for software tool articles, so essentially an article that announces a new software and explains how to operate it. We look for a software availability statement, and software tool articles with no source code available at all in the manuscript or in the submission will be rejected. For other article types, which can use software for analysis, or any other parts of the methods, we check that the methods report the version used, a URL to access and download the software, and any open source alternative if the software is under a third-party license. And for articles where an analysis code has been developed by the authors, for example, in our script, we require that the code is deposited into a dedicated open online repository and assigned a DOI and an open license, and that must be also cited in the data availability statement at the end of the manuscript. So a little bit more on that. Essentially, custom code, whether source or analysis code, must be made available. So we ask authors, it's a little bit different than the data. We ask authors to create a permanent registration, which is also called archiving your code on Zenodo, and we also recommend you upload it into a version control system like GitHub. So more often than not, what's going to happen is that authors tend to publish their code on GitHub and then register it or archive it from there on Zenodo. An OSI approved license, open license must be applied. So these can be GNU general public licenses or MIT licenses. And both GitHub project and registration DOI will be cited at the end of the manuscript. So for a software article, the source code will be cited in a software availability statement. and analysis code will be cited under the data availability in the extended data section. So here's an example of code availability statement. So this would be a software tool article. So you have the GitHub project and Zenodo archive links. So the DOI is on the archive line, the license, and then you have your data, your underlying data and extended data. And here's the an analysis code availability example. So it's under extended data, and it's pretty much the same. You have the GitHub link, the archive DOI, and the license. And here you can just find the links to the papers that I've cited and an open data toolkit that F1000Research has developed.
Right, thanks for that, Leah. So I'm now going to talk you through reporting guidelines and reproducible methods and how these contribute to research integrity. So a reporting guideline is defined by the Equator Network as a checklist, flow diagram, or structured text to guide authors in reporting a specific type of research developed using explicit methodology. They are simple, structured tools for researchers to use while writing manuscripts and provide a minimum list of information needed to ensure a manuscript can be understood by readers and replicated by researchers. They ensure that reporting on research is standardized, that all required details are included, and that the study's aims, methods, and results are clearly stated. I've included some of the reporting guidelines which we require or endorse here, but there are many different guidelines for a wide range of study types and areas. Not all article or study types have an associated set of reporting guidelines to follow. Even without reporting guidelines, part of our open ethos involves the reproducibility of research. This means that anyone reading an article we publish should be able to potentially exactly replicate the methods used. Replication of research methods is important, as this shows that the study was carried out exactly as stated in the article, and allows future researchers to build upon your study and methods used. This is key to the trustworthiness and enhancement of good research practice, which is at the heart of research integrity. As a result, the pre-publication team will ask for more detail when checking through an article if we feel that anything in the methodology is not clear. As an example, here's a screenshot of the PRISMA guidelines, which are designed for use with systematic reviews. As you can see, the guidelines require a good level of detail in reporting, including the choices made and the reasons for these, along with declaring any potential sources of bias and other information. The guidelines require authors to indicate where this information has been provided in the article, and so are also a useful tool for us in editing. It is easy to see how the research was carried out and why, and how the results were reached, among other things. As all articles of this type are reported in the same way, it is easy to navigate the research to find certain information. All reporting guidelines serve this purpose in increasing the transparency and reproducibility of research methods. And so the pre-publications team will check for authors' use of these during the initial checks. We don't require reporting guidelines to be followed for all study types which have them, but we always strongly recommend that you follow these if not. As mentioned, we will also ask for a high level of detail in the methods, even for articles which don't require guidelines, which will involve asking for similar information during our pre-publication checks. Oops. So now I'll take you through our checks on authorship and how these relate to research integrity. As a requirement, at least one named author on the paper must have a formal appointment at a recognised research or clinical institution or organisation, have a PhD or MD qualification, and a publication record. For humanities and social science fields, a master's qualification or equivalent may be sufficient. However, the author must have an appointment at a recognised institution and a previous publication record. This is not a case of gatekeeping research, but rather ensuring that an author is qualified to write on the subject of the article. If the institution or qualification of the authors does not match the subject of the paper, or the authors do not have sufficient experience in the field, then the article may not present a constructive contribution to the existing field of research. If an author does not meet our requirements, but believes that they are qualified to write on the subject, they can be endorsed by an individual who does meet our requirements. During our checks, we also ensure that the contribution of any individual listed as an author meets our definition of authorship. This is based on the ICMJE criteria for authorship, which requires authors to have made substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data for the work. This is along with contributing to the writing of the article through drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content, giving final approval for the version to be published, and agreeing to be accountable for all aspects of the work. The prepublications team checks this by ensuring that each author has been given credit roles which meets these criteria upon submission. In addition to authorship, we require all potential conflicts of interest, even if the author does not consider these to have influenced the study or its outcomes, to be stated upon submission. And we will raise any potential undeclared conflicts of interest which we believe exist with authors. These declared competing interests will be included with the published article, alongside other article details at the top of the article page, as seen in the example here. This is in the interest of transparency, so that readers are aware of potential outside influences on the design and results of the study. The example statement included on this slide is for an article on the efficiency of pig farming techniques. The authors here have declared their affiliation with the Open Philanthropy Project, despite the project's lack of involvement with the study, as the interests of the project could be said to have had an influence on the study. As an author, stating any conflicts of interest therefore increases the trust and confidence which readers have in your study. And conversely, any undeclared competing interests would potentially damage the credibility of your research if not mentioned. So it is important to ensure you have declared anything which could be a competing interest when submitting research. Next, I'll take you through ethics and consent, how we check for this, and what this has to do with research integrity. So we require ethical approval to have been granted for all studies which include human data, or data from protected animals and some plants. If this has not been provided when necessary, the team will query with the authors on whether ethical approval was given. If ethical approval was not required, we need a detailed explanation of the reason for this included in the article. For articles involving patient or participant data and information, authors must ensure that they have written informed consent from all study subjects. If this is not included, the pre-publications team will query this. This ensures that all participants were treated fairly, correctly, and with oversight of an institutional ethics board. In addition, written consent means that we have documented evidence that participants were aware of the purpose of the study and that they agreed to be involved in the study. For animal studies, we require an ethical approval statement too, or if this is not required, a statement explaining why this was the case, including details of efforts made to ameliorate suffering of animals. We also require authors to follow the ARRIVE reporting guidelines for all studies involving live animals. As you can see in the example statement quoted here, the authors of this paper have included the name and approval number from the ethical board and information on how participants gave consent. This is important as we need to know that the study's methods have been considered and deemed ethical by the institutional board. For this example, the methodology applied was a survey on engagement with charitable lotteries as a marketing tool. Despite the simple agree or disagree answers provided by participants in the survey, this is still considered human data as there were still human participants in the study. And so it was important that the article included ethical approval and participant consent details. The fact that the authors considered ethical approval as part of the study design and provided this information freely with the article serves to increase the confidence which readers will have in the results presented. I'll now pass over to the peer review team, who will explain how open peer review can enhance research integrity.
So, after publication of an article, we receive peer review reports on them. But the process before we do this is we have an author-led model. So we have authors submit us names, potential reviewers they think would be appropriate, and we assess them before inviting them to review articles, and then in this process we try and maintain an open identity and open report system, which I will take you through now. So, as I mentioned, base emitters names, and so it's generally required that they be from an international diverse background. So we found that where there is bias in open reviewing, it largely falls on national lines. So by inviting a wide range of reviewers from different countries, we hope to mitigate that national bias. And there's an article you can read there if you're interested. And perhaps more crucially, we also do basic background checks on them to ensure that they are actually qualified to review the article in the first place. So we check their institutional affiliations to see if they are, share an institution with one of the authors, or have in the recent past and might know them, because obviously that constitute a conflict of interest, whether they're in the correct research area, so they can give a proper review, and whether they have sufficient experience. If someone's just graduated off a PhD course, but they haven't got any publications, or if someone hasn't got their PhD yet, we do not consider that sufficiently experienced to review a research article. And then what we do after this, we pull them on further checks, which basically means that in case we've missed anything, they can be more thoroughly gone over, which allows us to sort of basically know their histories a bit better, and ensure there are no conflicts of interest. And if we have concerns, we can and sometimes do sort of double check these ourselves. When we publish reports, we try and keep as much as we possibly can out in the open. So with names of institutions, people can sort of check if they are, it hopefully also reduces the tendency for sort of like glib reports. It means we have a more constructive process that basically means that because it will be open, they're able to publish, they are inclined towards publishing a report that sort of shows their reasoning better and their logic better, and also it's more constructive. And given that we have a post-publication review model, the encouragement of revisions rather than sort of blanket rejections help sort of like, if paper is, if they don't approve of it, constructive suggestions in order to sort of indicate how, if it is possible, they think it will eventually sort of become fit to pass peer review. I also think the open system with the sort of listing of co-reviewers alongside the main reviewer sort of helps issues of, sometimes grad students have been found to write asked to write reports on behalf of their supervisors or superiors, and hopefully this sort of brings that down a bit, but also having their emails sort of associated with the report, although those aren't published alongside the report. So we also have a reviewer tracker, which also helps maintain integrity, or maybe openness in this regard. So lets us stay on top of who is reviewing whose articles in our systems, in case some people are just quite prolific in their reports, and that's amazing. But just to make sure that we don't have one author and one reviewer who's also an author and the other person's also a reviewer, who end up reviewing each other's articles. We believe that the openness of the reports basically makes science more accessible. So the reviewers and authors are able to interact with one another, and sort of explain their disagreements and explain where they disagree, and it also helps lay readers and students understand the process by which the decision was arrived at. You can see, oh, this was, I don't you know, I put reservations, and then there's some methodological slips, or, you know, I prove it unreservedly because, you know, I think, you know, I think, you know, I have these minor issues that I think should be addressed in a revision, but they don't hold back the scientific validity of the article, and they're not, you know, necessary conditions for scientific status. And also it allows, you know, rather than sort of hold, if a report gets, you know, approved and then not approved, and then they revise it, you know, and they meet the person's reactions, it helps readers understand why there is, you know, contestation over the validity of the report, you know, of the validity of the article and how it was resolved, rather than it being pulled and then you only see the final product, should the revisions be made. And so it helps, you know, it should help at least popularize, you know, help people who aren't necessarily in, you know, publishing or peer reviewing or the authors of the article understand how these decisions are arrived at. And we also, as you can see in the top right of the screen, so we publish competing interests alongside it. So, you know, I worked to one person, hasn't been at the university for a while now, but they were at the same university as someone, and, you know, and another one is, you know, I have a strong theoretical investment with the work I'm publishing, and that, you know, influences it, but it, you know, but they say, you know, it hasn't influenced their objectivity. And so that's what keeping the competing interests in the open also allows people to understand, you know, I mean, how the sausage is made, I guess, and sort of like how, you know, and what they should keep in mind when assessing a report. We also have a comment system, which also serves a similar function. So not only to keep it open between reviewers and authors. So a new report is published, a reviewer will often, you know, do the report, and then they submit a new article to respond to the report, a new version of the article, and then they will often attach comments with it. So, you know, they'll say, oh, well, I've made this change, or sometimes they'll say, you know, I actually don't agree. I don't think, you know, I don't think this software is bad, or I don't think that this is a bad, or maybe in a humanities and social sciences setting, they'll say, I don't think that my theoretical framework, you know, I don't think you should, you know, not approve this article because of my theoretical framework. I believe in it for such and such reason, and, you know, it synthesizes, it explains the data this way. You know, it's not a methodological failing on my part. You know, something to that effect helps everyone understand how this process has been arrived at, what the disagreements are, and why the article has or has not passed peer review, and whether authors and reviewers stand with each other. Articles are liable to change, and this will be dealt with later on in the presentation. And also open comments has a slightly more democratic function rather than a sort of understanding what's going on between the author and reviewer. You can also, the comment section also allows, you know, other academics to basically submit comments and say, you know, I've had comments in the past which are like, hey, you forgot to upload, you know, this bit of your table, or you're missing some annotations, or like, and then there's also space for them to be more critical, like, I actually don't think that, like, they might not want to give a full review, but they can say, you know, I'm a bit confused by this doesn't really make sense, or say, this is good, I like it, or even comment about reviewers. And yeah, and all articles are permanently published. So we'll get on to reservations later, but revisions later. But basically, every article's up, and you can see the whole thing forever. So, you know, let's say someone is criticized and then they revise. You can see the changes that were made. You can see the process by which an article went from being, you know, as a reviewer might deem non-scientific, or, you know, not fit for indexing, but then has arrived at a process by which it is, and it means that you can see sort of, again, sort of the process by which we actually arrive at a consensus over an article, rather than presenting just the finished product. So, and and they'll always be available to read, drawn, and and so we also adhere to code guidelines, and try and maintain maintain those standards when it comes to interactions with reviewers and research integrity within the article itself. You can make corrections to it. So, for example, where in the amendment section there'll be a little box, and that little box says, here's what was wrong in the last one. Here's what I've modified, and it sort of gives a synopsis as to what the authors have changed. And it's always a live document, so the author is always able to change the article, and the reviewers are notified of this each time. And so that, I hope, helps keep the process open, and also allow articles to be changed according to the state of things. That's me done. Over to Trina.
Thanks, Tom. So publication in F1000 is much more dynamic than in traditional journals, as our articles are still developing even after the author's initial version has been published. As Tom said, authors can submit a new version of their article and address any concerns or shortcomings that were identified by our reviewers during the peer review process. And we do strongly encourage authors to address the reviewer comments by publishing the new versions and responding directly to the reports. And these responses are then also published under each report. Once that new version is published, the reviewers of the previous version are re-invited, and they can check and assess whether their concerns have been addressed, and they can then update their peer review status. If the article does not pass peer review after this revision, then the authors can revise their article again for another round of peer review. So this open communication allows other researchers and readers to follow the scholarly conversation that has shaped the article. Next slide, please. So new versions are clearly marked as a revised version, as you can see here, and even if the title has been updated, the previous title will still also be included in all new versions. And as mentioned, a short summary of the revisions will be displayed at the start of each new version in the amendment section, and this just highlights to the readers what has been changed and contains all the specific information of the revisions. All versions of the article are accessible, each with their own GUI, and that can be accessed in the open peer review box. Just clicking on each version will take you to that version of the article. And the most recent article version will be displayed on our website as a default, but the older versions will clearly display a notification to inform readers that a newer version is available. Once an article passes peer review, all versions of the article are also indexed. And as all articles are living, even after peer review is complete, the authors can publish an updated version of their articles at any time if there have been small developments relevant to the findings. And like revised versions, updated articles will also be clearly marked as such with a brief update text to explain the updates made, and reviewers will be notified that an update published as well. Next slide, please. So if there is a potential or not yet resolved problem with an article, it may be appropriate to alert our readers with an editorial note. For example, if we receive information that research or publication misconduct has taken place, this can be raised by reviewers invited and our readers, and we do take these issues very seriously. The editorial note will usually be posted while further investigations take place and until a permanent solution is found. which may result in a revised corrected version or retraction. The editorial note will remain published with the article, with an updated one published once the permanent solution is reached. So this enables the full history of the article to be fully transparent and allows readers to follow exactly what has happened to the article since publication. Next slide. In rare cases, an expression of concern may be published if there are serious concerns about an article, but no conclusive evidence can be obtained that would justify a retraction. Therefore, readers can proceed to read the article with caution, and this may include the reasons listed on the slide, so inconclusive evidence of research, and any investigation into the alleged misconduct that has not been impartial or conclusive. Next slide, please. And articles can be retracted as well for several reasons, including the reasons below. So authors, reviewers, and readers can raise these concerns. And of course, we will carry out rigorous investigations. Next slide, please. An article is usually only retracted at the author's request or by the publisher in response to an institutional investigation. So for any retracted article, the reason for the retraction and who is instigating the retraction will be clearly stated in the retraction notice. The retraction notice will be linked to the article, which usually remains on the site, and the article will be clearly marked as being retracted, including the PDF. But it's important to note that in the context of F1000Research's publication model, that as in traditional journals, a retracted article is not unpublished or withdrawn in order for it to be published elsewhere. The reasons for retraction are usually so serious that the whole study or large parts are not appropriate to be included in the scientific literature anywhere. Under rare circumstances, for example, if false or inaccurate data have been published that, if acted upon, pose a serious health risk, the original incorrect versions may be removed and a corrected version published. The reason for this partial removal would be clearly stated on the latest version, and if any peer review reports were published, these would remain online. However, if we were to retract and remove an article's content for legal or ethical reasons, the reports are also removed, and we would also thank and acknowledge the work of the peer reviewers in the retraction notice. Thank you very much for your time today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, and I'll pass on to Melissa now for the Q&A.